Well, good morning. I'm so pleased we get to be together today for this part two in this series called Road to the Cross, leading up to Easter. Those of you who are worshiping with us at our campuses at Kentwood, Knapp Street, East Paris, I'm so pleased we get to jump into this series together. And 1 week ago, last Sunday, was Oscar weekend, you know, when they give the Academy Awards. Trivia question, do any of you know who won the Academy Award for Best Actor in a leading role? Best actor in a leading role. Any of you? Just scream out the name. Don't worry, I'll let you know if you're wrong. Gary Oldman. All right, Gary Oldman is a movie called Darkest Hour, masterfully played the role of Winston Churchill. And the entire movie takes place in just a few days in the spring of 1940. The events surrounding the drama, World War II is just beginning. Nazi Germany has crushed country after country after country in Western Europe. France is about to fall. The Prime Minister of England, Neville Chamberlain, is forced out. And Churchill is pushed into this role as prime minister as all hell is breaking loose, and he finds himself very much alone. His war cabinet is not unified as far as what to do. There are strong ideas that they need to sue for peace with Germany, and without fighting, simply surrender and get the best negotiation they possibly can. His own political party is divided. He doesn't seem to have the support of the king. And there's this one moment in the movie that I found profoundly moving, and it's at 10 Downing Street, the residence of the prime minister. It's in the middle of the night, and his wife opens a door and looks into a spare bedroom where he's sitting on a bed, staring off into the distance in silence. He's disheveled, his shirt is wrinkled, he looks like he is a mess. And it's just this image as she looks in on him of absolute aloneness, carrying the world on his shoulders and feeling like he's just incredibly isolated and all alone in trying to figure out what to do and how to lead. I need you to seal that image in your mind, because today, as we follow Jesus in this series called Road to the Cross, the last events in his life leading up to the crucifixion, we are going to find our Lord in the middle of profound aloneness and isolation. Now, our study today picks up in the city of Jerusalem, but that's not where the mission. That's not where the mission started. The mission started up north in Galilee. Jesus' hometown is in Galilee. It's where he's raised. Nazareth is up north. Now, Jerusalem is down here in an area called Judea. So the province of Judea is in the south, and Samaria separates Judea from Galilee in the north. It's where Jesus collects many of his disciples. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus knew them. There's a day he's walking down the shore. He tells Peter and Andrew, I want you to leave your nets and follow me. I need you to leave your business. I need you to leave your family. And I want you to become part of my trained task force, and they do. And then James and John are fishing. He says, I need you to leave your boats. I need you to leave your family's company. I need you to follow me, and they do. In fact, Matthew, a tax collector, is in Capernaum on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus sees this tax collector, and he makes a tax collector one of his 12 disciples, one of his followers, which of course was a scandal. And so the mission not only begins up north, but the conflict begins up north. There's conflict over the type of person that Jesus is hanging out with. He seemed to have a deep affection for spiritual lowlifes, and they surrounded him and listened to him talk. Then there's arguments that surface, arguments about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. And then there's this whole conflict that erupts when he starts looking at people and saying, I forgive your sins. He say, no one can forgive sins but God. And so the scandal begins up north. And so if you're in Jerusalem in the south, the problem is kind of going on up there. But during this festival, the last week of Jesus' life, Jesus has come south with his disciples, and the problem up north has become very much your problem. It's a festival week. It's called Passover. And when Jesus rides a donkey into Jerusalem, people go nuts and start screaming, Hosanna, which means God, save us. This is a country under Roman dominance. You have Roman soldiers marching through your streets, and the people are singing, yelling, "God, save us now," as Jesus rides in. Then he goes up here to the temple complex area, camps out there day after day after day like he owns the place. It's like the old Western from decades ago when there's a sheriff that goes, "This town ain't big enough for the two of us." And the religious leaders are like, "This town is not big enough for the two of us." And they want to get him dead. The problem is that during the day when he's teaching up here, they can't arrest him because he's so popular that literally a riot could break out in the temple area. And at night, they can't find him. But they've lucked out. One of his 12, one of his chosen, selected and trained task force, one of his 12, a disciple by the name of Judas, comes to the leaders and says, I can tell you where to find him at night. I can lead you to him in the darkness and point out which one is him. And it is night now, and it's hours before the arrest. And you think, well, sure, one of the 12 defected, but he still has 11 close, loyal, devoted, diehard friends that will never leave his side. And it's when Jesus drops the bomb, when he says, "You will all fall away." Jesus looks at his disciples and says, "By the time this night is over, you are all gonna run, and I am going to be very much alone." As we walk through the story this morning, what I want more than anything else is for you to see him and in some way to try to get your brain and to try to get your heart around what he's experiencing. To try to get rid of the cardboard Jesus, the plastic Jesus. To try to see what he's feeling and try to see what he's experiencing. What I want more than anything else in this message and in this series is for many of us to get reacquainted with Jesus. And for some of us to get acquainted with him for the very first time. And as we get acquainted with him, for our affection for him to grow. As we see him today profoundly deserted and absolutely alone in his hour of darkness. The story unfolds in 3 locations. We're gonna watch him travel. So today's story, 3 locations. Location number 1 is the road. And we happen to know what side of Jerusalem he's on. We happen to know where he's walking. He leaves the upper room with his disciples. He leaves the Last Supper. He leaves the city of Jerusalem, and he's walking toward an olive orchard. And so our best guess, there's we call it a trail, but thousands of people took this. And so don't think sketchy hiking trail, think well-built Roman road that would have left this side of the city, goes down into the valley where there's a stream, and then he's heading toward an olive orchard called the Garden of Gethsemane. And somewhere along the road, this is what Jesus says. He tells his disciples, why don't you check this out with me? This is Mark chapter 11, verse 27. Here we go. He says, "You will all fall away," Jesus told them. He said, "For it is written, I will strike the what? I'll strike the shepherd." Now, what's gonna happen to the sheep? And the sheep will be scattered. He says, "It is written." I believe this is like taken from the Jewish scriptures of Zechariah, hundreds of years before the time of Jesus. There's this prophecy, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. And Jesus is the shepherd. He's basically saying the shepherd is gonna get hit and the sheep are gonna flee in absolute chaos and confusion. He's predicting that his selected and trained task force, that by the time the night is over, they are going to be disillusioned, they are going to be in chaos, they're going to be in confusion. It's like, I'm gonna get hit and you guys are going to run for your lives. Now there's something that happens next that I don't wanna focus on, but I want you to see it. And then I hope to come back to it at the very end of the teaching today. I just want you to see this, and I just want you to remember that this is here. It's the next verse, verse 28, where Jesus says, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into what part of the country? Galilee, which is directionally north, south, east, west, which is which way? Up north. That's where the whole mission started. That's where most of them are from. That's where he gathered them and they selected him. And so he says, listen, he's already looking through the abandonment, through the arrest, through the trial, through the crucifixion, and he's forecasting here. This is a flash forward. He says, by the way, I'm coming back. When I'm risen, we're all gonna be reunited up in Galilee. He's already predicting reunion before this whole awful mess takes place, before all awful breaks loose. He's already predicting their reunion. Now Peter is standing there, and Peter goes, yeah, right, like that's gonna happen. And Peter makes a very bold statement. He goes, if everyone deserts you, I won't desert you. Now, James and John, they might run. My brother Andrew, he might run. Philip, Matthew, they might take off. I will never desert you. And this is Peter. Jesus looks at Peter and says, I've got some news for you. Before tomorrow morning, before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, marking the dawn of a new day, before 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, you, my friend, are gonna disown me 3 times. And Peter goes, yeah, like that's gonna happen. It says, but Peter insisted emphatically, even I have to die with you, I will not disown you. And all the others said, yeah, us too. They said the same thing. And so Peter's like, oh yeah, over my dead body. If they kill you, they're gonna have to kill me to get to you. The conversation that takes place along the road is a conversation that is marked by just a wee bit of overconfidence. I wanna suggest to you 2 things. Number 1 is they are incredibly vulnerable. And number 2, they are oblivious to how vulnerable they are. They don't see it coming, and Jesus does see it coming. What you have here is not only Jesus' prediction that he's gonna be abandoned, that they're gonna desert him, but you have their absolute, emphatic, repeated denial that such a thing could possibly happen. Can we camp out there just for a minute and not think about them? But can I just ask you to think about you? We are naive to think that we could never fall flat on our face. We're naive. There's that scripture that comes to mind in the Bible that says, he who stands, let him who stands beware unless he fall. And there's something about an attitude that says, man, I could never slip up. I could never do anything that would be a colossal embarrassment to me and damage those around me. And my friends, I just think it would be a good experience every once in a while to look in the mirror in the morning and just to point in the mirror and say, okay, much better men than I have done really stupid things. Ladies, I think it would be good every once in a while just to look in the mirror and say, far better women than I have fallen flat on their faces. There's this song, we sing it from time to time. It's not a newer one, it's an older one. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. It's called Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. Some of you familiar with this song? There's this lyric in it that is absolutely haunting. It's that lyric that goes, prone, you know how it goes? Prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. And there's just this prayer, take my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. I just love the brutal honesty. Listen, the dude that wrote the hymn long ago was just saying, I know that my heart can drift in absolutely unimaginable ways. Location number one is along the road, and it is a conversation that is marked by both vulnerability and massive overconfidence. But Jesus here is predicting that he is going to be left desperately alone. Location number 2, they arrive at the garden. This is often called the Garden of Gethsemane, but don't picture like manicured flower garden. The image that should come to your mind when you hear Garden of Gethsemane is not tulip time. It's more, it's an olive orchard. The name Gethsemane meant, like an olive press, and often you would crush olives to get their oil at the same place they would be farmed. And so if you travel to Jerusalem today and you go outside of Jerusalem and up the Mount of Olives a little bit, there's a place that is marked as this is the place where the Garden of Gethsemane was. You go, right, how do they know for sure? But you're standing there and you go, it was probably someplace really close to this that it actually happens. Now, in the garden, location number 2, Jesus does something with how many disciples does he have now? Judas has defected, starts with 12. Judas has defected, leaving him now with 11, but he separates the group. Good math skills, by the way. He separates the group. He takes 8 of his disciples and he goes, okay, you guys stay here. And then he moves a little ways with his inner circle, the closest 3. Because these 12 disciples, every once in a while, Jesus would say, okay, you 9 stay here, and Peter, James, John, I want you to travel with me for this special conversation or to witness this thing. And so he leaves 8 here, and he takes Peter, James, and John with him a little bit farther. Now, he is gonna go even a little farther still, and he just needs to talk with his Father about this awfulness that's about to happen. But first, he has this conversation with his 3 closest disciples, and what he's really saying here is, I need you guys. I can't be alone right now. I don't want to be alone right now. I need you guys. Look at the way he says it. It says he took Peter, verse 33 of Mark 14. He took Peter, James, and John. This is his inner circle along with him. And he began to be, and you get 2 expressions here, deeply distressed and what? Troubled. Listen, he knows what's coming. You say, well, if you know what's coming, then it shouldn't bother you. No, if you know what's coming, it might bother you more. He is physically, visibly shaken by what he's about to walk into. And Jesus, what was the expression? Deeply distressed and troubled. And then he talks to him, and this is what he says. He says, my soul is overwhelmed. This is absolutely overwhelming. It's overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. It's like he's saying, it's like this is just the knowledge of what I'm walking into. This is killing me. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. And he said to them, stay here and keep watch. I just need to have my closest friends nearby and alert. I need you with me. And then he travels just a little bit farther and separates himself from them. And we have his prayer recorded here in brief. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what? Last 2 words, what? You will. He goes a little farther. It says he throws himself on the ground. He's just laid out. And he says, please take this cup away from me. But not what I will, but what you will. It's interesting imagery. He goes, I don't want to drink what's in here. I don't want to drink what's in here. Could you take this away, please? What's in the cup? Before the night is out, he will be spit on and have saliva in his beard and on his face. Before the night is out, He will be blindfolded and punched out before the next day is out. He will be tacked to boards and suspended naked in the air and taunted by his enemies. That's what's in the cup. Before the night is out, he will undergo an interrogation from some of the most powerful people in the country, and he will have to go through that all alone with no support. That's what's in the cup. He goes, do I have to drink what's in here? Take this cup away. Take this cup away. Also, I think that in ways we cannot fully comprehend or understand, as Jesus is suspended on the cross, which was the most brutal form of killing someone that the Roman soldiers had concocted. It was designed not to execute you, but to torture you in blinding pain for hours as your life dripped out of you. But as Jesus is being executed between two common rebels, two common thieves, we have a sense, and again, we don't understand this or fully comprehend this, that Jesus is carrying the weight of every sin ever committed. Every angry word ever screamed in any house, any abusive thing said, any abusing thing done, he's carrying it all. And it was horrible and it was awful. And here he is in the garden, he's on his face, and he goes, do I have to drink what's in here? Please take this cup away. And we know what that's like, because we know what it's like to pray the make this go away prayer. Dear God, make this lawsuit go away, make this cancer go away, make this nasty, angry, bitter mood of my teenager go away, make this snow go away, make this depression go away. We loved this apartment until those neighbors moved in. The one with the loud music till 4 a.m. Dear gracious God, make them go away. Make this go away. And that's a legitimate prayer. It's a prayer that attempts to move the heart and activity of God. But I just plead with you to notice how Jesus' prayer lands. He says, please take this cup away. But then there's that disruptive part at the end where he says, but not what I will, but what you will. He goes, this is up to you. And if you're asking me to drink what's in the cup, I'm going to drink what's in the cup. See, this is powerful. Because an indication we have here is that we as we pray the make this go away prayer, it's attempting to move the will of God, but there should also be an alignment with the will of God. Some of you have prayed this hundreds and hundreds of times without even knowing it. The Lord's Prayer, some of you grew up saying to our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, I go, your kingdom come, my will be done. That's the prayer I want to pray. Your will be done, your will be done. What I'm suggesting is there's times when we come to God with open hands and say, gracious God, this is what I need you to do today. And there are times when we should come with open hands, probably in the same prayer, and we go, gracious God, what do you need me to do today? Dear God, I have a list and I'm thankful that you are at my disposal. How am I at God's disposal? And Jesus is here, the submissive son. And when he says, take this away, his loving Father says, no. And Jesus is going to drain what's in this cup. He is so alone and he needs support from his friends so badly. He gets up off the ground and walks over to his support group. And we read this in verse 37. Then he returned to the disciples and he found them sound asleep. He wakes them up and he addresses one of the three. Any guesses which one of the three he addresses? He goes, Peter, man, I need you, man. Couldn't you just stay awake 1 hour? And he stares Peter down and says, listen, you stay alert and you pray because you're going to fall into temptation. So Satan wants to destroy you. He wants to sift you. And then he's alone and he's disrupted, but having compassion on, this is a case study in human weakness. Jesus just acknowledges that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. You want desperately to stay awake and you're incapable of staying awake. This case study in human weakness is just this gap between the people we want to be and sometimes the way that we end up acting. Jesus goes back and prays again, comes back and they're asleep again. And it says they wake up and they're just embarrassed and they don't even know what to say. He goes back and prays a third time and comes back and they're sleeping a third time. What happens is they're with him, but they're not with him. He's got company, but he doesn't have company. He's with his friends, but he's separated and isolated from his friends. And finally, this third time, Jesus says, well, here he is. Let's go. And there are torches coming into this area of the olive orchard. Jesus had hung out with his disciples here before. And Judas says, okay, I know 2 or 3 places we might find him. This is one of them. And Judas marches right up. There are guards. They are carrying swords and they are carrying clubs. These people are packing. And he comes up and he plants a kiss on Jesus. Says, Rabbi, greetings, Rabbi. When the disciples figure out that Jesus is not going to resist arrest, he looks at this group of guards. This isn't a mob. They are well ordered. He says, man, I taught in the temple every single day. Why the SWAT team? Am I leading a rebellion? You'd have to come out and try to find me at night. And when it becomes apparent that Jesus is not going to resist arrest, he is not going to put up a fight, we find this in verse 50, then everybody did what? Man, baby, they deserted him and they took off. They deserted him and fled. Jesus is deserted and now he is alone. See, the shepherd is going to take a blow and all of the sheep are going to scatter in chaos, disillusionment, and confusion. So, some years ago, I immersed myself in the work of an American artist from the first part of the last century. Guy's name was Edward Hopper. Anyone familiar with Edward Hopper's stuff? Okay, this print hangs in my basement. It's called Nighthawks, and the original hangs in the Art Museum of Chicago. So sometime when you're on Michigan Avenue, duck into the Art Museum. It's in the American collection. And Hopper did this painted this in 1942. And one of the elements that surfaces again and again in Hopper's paintings is that of alienation and isolation. And so just the way that the customers and the server in the diner, they're on the inside of the glass and you're on the outside of the glass. So you're kind of on the outside looking in. Now there's obviously a door to the place, but you can't see the door. And so you're looking in at them almost like you would look in at fish in an aquarium. And so the separation begins here where you're separated from them, but you look inside and say, well, there's 4 people together. No, there's 4 people and they're not together. This guy is sitting alone and he's hunched over beverage or a meal. You've got the server. He's on the inside of the counter with his professional outfit and he's separated physically from the counter from the guests that are there. And even the couple, you don't even know if they're a couple, or if they just hooked up at the diner. They're close to each other. Their hands are almost touching, but she's looking ahead and he's looking ahead. And it's just this case study in what it's like to be among people and at the same time separated from those people. If you were to do a parody of Nighthawks today, I would suggest to you that everybody would be scrolling through their cell phone with people and not with people. There's another painting that is worthy of mentioning, and it's called Automat. And if you just looked at the picture, you'd go, okay, woman's sitting at a table. But the title gives it away, because automats were a type of restaurant springing up around New York City in the 1920s. An automat is this, where you walk into a place and you drop your coins in, kind of vending machine style, and then you open a door and then you take out the sandwich or the piece of pie or the bowl of soup, and then you close the door. What this means is that you're not even connected to the restaurant people. The cooks, they're on the other side of this wall, this vending machine wall. There is no server to greet you at your table. There is no hostess. And so back to the picture, the fact that it's called automat, she's had one of these connections where you put the money in and you get a cup of coffee and then you sit down. She hasn't taken her coat off. One glove is on and one glove is off. You don't know whether she's coming or going. I don't know that she knows whether she's coming or going. There's an empty chair on the opposite side of the table. Was she stood up? Did someone leave abruptly? But this is isolation in a big city, New York City, millions of people, and yet this feeling of absolute aloneness and alienation. When was the last time you felt like that? Have you ever felt like that? Someone very, very close to you died, and you're traveling through a season of grief, and you have friends that show up, but then they kind of get on with their lives, and it's hard for you to get on with yours. You carry it for months, you carry it for years. This loss defines you. Nicholas Walterstorff was a prof from Grand Rapids area, later on the East Coast. Lost his son Eric in a climbing accident. In his thin little book, Lament for a Son, Walterstorff says that grief not only separates the grievers from the non-grievers, grief separates the grievers from each other. Because even people in the same family grieve at a different speed and in different ways. And sometimes you have one person saying, how can you go on as if everything is okay? And the other person is saying, why can't you move on? Grief not only separates the grievers from the non-grievers, it can often separate the grievers from each other. When is the last time you felt like that? Some kind of a move that spun you into a zone where you lost the friend group that you had? I've talked before about some of my early years, right before my 8th grade year, moving from Idaho to West Michigan, and then right before my sophomore year in high school, moving from West Michigan to Northern California. New house, new church, new family, new school, no friends. Those of you in middle school and high school who have had to make a geographic move and find your way into a brand new school and brand new area, I feel your pain. When's the last time you felt like that? They've been married 50, 52 years. Suddenly his wife is experiencing the telltale signs of dementia. And month by month, they are losing their shared memories together. He has her, but he has less of her. You spiral into a depression and it feels like it isolates you from the rest of the world. When was the last time you experienced that? This, my friends, is what Jesus experiences in our story. Clue after clue after clue in the story is saying, this guy is desperately alone. He wants his friends. He needs his friends. He is alone. Now, this means two things. It means that on that day when your heart is breaking and you look upward and say, do you have any idea what it is to feel this? A voice would come back and say, oh, I absolutely do. You pray to a God When you say, dear Lord, Lord Jesus, dear Jesus, you pray to a God who understands your aloneness because he traveled through it. That's one thing, and it's incredibly powerful, but there's something else. Not only does he understand your aloneness, but do you understand his? This story is leading us sentence by sentence, location by location, through absolute desertion of those that he had invested in. We're supposed to feel him. And we're supposed to grow in our affection for him, because when we get Jesus, we get someone who traveled that road for us. When we get Jesus, we get someone who embraced and who engaged and who experienced the whole human experience with all of its joy and all of its disappointment and all of its tragedy. Jesus is taken away under guard. 11 disciples run. And one of them stops. He goes, I'm not a coward. I'm not a deserter. I made a promise and I'm keeping it. And Peter turns. And Peter follows the arrest crew to the home of the high priest, the estate of the high priest. A guy by the name of Caiaphas, where Jesus will be interrogated throughout the night. Now, the setting, the location is our third location, which is the house. Should have called it the estate, because it's not a simple house. In fact, this next image, it kind of gives us at least an idea of the geography of this story, because the type of architecture is called peristyle architecture. It's where you would have the rooms surrounding an open courtyard on four sides, but then there's a courtyard in the very middle. Peter walks in, he camps out in the courtyard. And apparently it's cold because there's some people warming their hands on a fire, part of the guards, household servants, and Peter just walks right up to the fire and sits by the fire. But Jesus is feet away, and Jesus is being interrogated feet away by some of the most powerful people in the country. And so I'm just gonna read a couple of verses from this interrogation. We read, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, that's like a 70-member Jewish Supreme Court. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they could not find any. She's like, we are going to kill you. We just have to figure out what evidence and what charges we're going to kill you on, all right? So they're looking for evidence, but it said they could not find any, which is an interesting expression. Then it says in the next verse, it says, many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. And you're going, okay, what's up with this? In this interrogation, the high priest, this group, the Sanhedrin, they're attempting to follow protocol. And protocol was that when a witness came accusing somebody of something, and a second witness came, you needed at least two witnesses, they would ask you some basic questions to make sure that the story was not concocted. So they would say, what day did this happen? And if a guy said, I heard Jesus say this, what day? Tuesday. Next person, I heard Jesus say this, what day? Wednesday. Both testimonies are disallowed. Prime two new witnesses, send two new witnesses in. What did Jesus say? He said this. What did Jesus say? He said this. When did that take place? 6 a.m. When did that take place? 6 p.m. Both testimonies are disallowed. And so they have not done a really good job on briefing their witnesses. And because they're making up stories, they're not getting the facts right, and they're having to kick out testimony after testimony after testimony after testimony. But finally, a couple of people step forward and they say, we heard him say this, and their testimony agreed about something, at least they agreed with each other, and it had to do with this building right here, the temple. It says, we heard him say that he was gonna destroy the temple and then build it back in 3 days. Now what Jesus actually said is, destroy this temple, and it will be rebuilt in 3 days. You can kill me, and I'm coming back 3 days later. But he was making very clear in his teaching at the temple that he was usurping the authority that was there. And so this whole thing about I'll destroy the temple, build it back in 3 days, saying, wait a second, whoa. Are you claiming to have ultimate authority in this country? You, this teacher from up north, up in the sticks, up in Galilee, you're claiming to have authority over us? The only one that could claim to have authority over us would be the coming Messiah. Are you claiming to be the coming Messiah? And during this accusation, witness after witness after witness, Jesus just stands there without saying anything, without refuting anything. There's really nothing to refute. So finally, the high priest, he says, what are you gonna say to all these accusations? And Jesus just stands there and says nothing. You have to understand something. Their case is unraveling. They finally got him and they can't get him. So finally, the high priest, he just goes off. It says, again, the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah? Are you the Son of the Blessed One? Now, Jesus, listen, just keep your mouth shut. They'll arrest you. They'll find a way to get you another day, but you don't have to say anything. And Jesus opens his mouth for the first time. I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of glory. He says, not only am I the Messiah, you will see me coming on clouds of glory. It's like he's placing himself equal to God. If you ask the question, by whose testimony is Jesus convicted? The answer is his. High priest rips his clothes, says, why do we need any more evidence? What do you think? Say he is guilty of death. And then the fun and games began. Then some began to spit on him. They blindfolded him and struck him with their. They put a bag over his head and began to punch him out. They said, prophesy. Meaning, okay, you're some great prophet. Who just hit you? And then they turned him over to the guards, and it says the guards took him and beat him. I think they beat the crap out of him. Jesus isn't even to the point where he's beaten with a whip yet and where he stands before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. Already, just as you see him, he's got a bloody nose, maybe a broken nose. He's got swollen eyes, and he is going through this very much alone, except for that one guy, that one faithful, loyal, diehard disciple that is out in the courtyard by the fire. I think Peter can see this happening. A girl walks by. She's a servant in Caiaphas' household. She sees Peter by the fire and she sees his face and says, you're one of them, aren't you? When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with the Nazarene Jesus, she said, but he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said. I mean, he moves. I mean, if she can see his face from the glow of the fire, get away from the fire. And he went to the entryway into the darkness. Some guards standing there by the entryway. Later, she spots him and she doesn't now address him. She addresses the guards and says, he's one of them. He says, no, I'm not. I don't know that guy. And then the guards, recognizing his Galilean accent from the north, they said, no, you're a Galilean. He says, I swear to you, I've never met the guy. I don't know what you're talking about. And just then, a rooster crows in the distance, marking the dawning of a new day. And it says that Peter wept. He's like he leaves the house and he's in this street. I just imagine him crumpling there, and the dude cries like a baby. Question, do you ever disappoint you? Yeah, I know. You can be disappointed by government. You can be disappointed by your church. You can be disappointed by family members. You can be disappointed by people in a company. But do you ever disappoint you? We find Peter here in a moment of catastrophic personal failure, doing something he never thought he would do. God cries like a baby. Do you ever disappoint you? Scene 3, location 3, the house. Back to location number 1. Jesus said, I will strike the shepherd and all the sheep will scatter. But then he dropped this hint about reunion. Remember that. He said, what did he say? After I am risen. He said, but after I am risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Peter, in his failure, I wish he remembered that. Peter, do you understand there will be a reunion? And if I'm Peter and I'm crumpled up in a ball there and I feel so shamed and I feel so disappointed and I feel like such a disappointment, I'm going, yeah. He might want the others, but he would never want me. I need to do a flash forward here. I'm going to move toward Easter Sunday. Women, his friends, show up at the tomb. There's no body there. There's someone in glistening white who gives this message to the women. But go tell his disciples. But go tell his disciples, next 2 words. And Peter, he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. I think those words, and Peter, I think Peter needs reassurance that he's still on the team. Jesus says, now go tell the disciples, I'm going to meet them in Galilee. Oh, by the way, please let Peter know that he's included. The power here is that while this guy is crumpled up in a ball crying, you just need to know something, that failure does not have to be final and failure does not have to be fatal. Personal failure does not have to be terminal. Jesus was already seeing through all of this horrible mess to a day of reunion. He says, listen, tell the disciples who bailed on me, tell them I'll meet them up north. We'll regroup, we'll start over. You see, the Jesus who was left all alone will not leave them all alone. The Jesus who was deserted has no intention of deserting them. Back to that moment in the movie Darkest Hour. See, I think it's a double meaning. I think it's the darkest hour for England, but I think it's the darkest internal hour for Winston Churchill. There's that moment when his wife opens the door at 10 Downing Street. He's in an unpacked spare bedroom. His clothes are disheveled. His shirt is rumpled. He is an absolute mess. He's staring off into the distance. His wife gives him a brief pep talk and then says, you have a guest. He said, who? She says, the king. And he says, what? Like, king of what? He says, our king. And the King of England, King George, walks into the room and he is dressed impeccably, right? And like Churchill has this half-hearted try to tuck his shirt in and button a button type thing, but he's just a mess. The King of England walks in and says, what is the situation with the cabinet? And Churchill just says, fear and panic. The King of England whispers these words to him. He says, I'll support you. He sits down next to him on this bed and he says, I will support you. I'm sitting in the theater and because I go, you're not alone. You are not alone. And there's this moment of terrible aloneness and this moment of incredible support. To persecuted Christians, almost ready to bail on their faith, they were given these words in Hebrews chapter 13, never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. In fact, we've been looking at Mark's gospel, Matthew's gospel, the final words of Matthew's gospel, Matthew chapter 28, and surely I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. As Matthew told the story of Jesus, it ends with these words, I am with you always. I will be with you always. As we travel through this tragic story of aloneness that Jesus experiences, my friends, we're supposed to feel something. We're supposed to see him. We're supposed to experience him. We're supposed to hear him. We're supposed to watch him. And our affection for him is supposed to grow. We're supposed to get reacquainted with him. And as we get reacquainted with him, the story today ends with the knowledge that the one who was abandoned will not abandon you. And the one who was left all alone has no intention of leaving you alone. You are not alone. Seek him. Reach out to him and find him. May our gracious God meet us this week as we move into our complex worlds of work and family and relationships. And as we move, may we sense again his affection and his nearness. We ask these things in the name of Jesus, who walked the road to the cross. Amen.